Hi, my name is Daniel Hutchins, and today I wanted to do a review on the book The Avengers Legacy of Thanos. So there it is. Okay, so in the beginning of the book, Captain Marvel is flying through space until she comes across a control room inside of a spaceship where she supposedly discovers that something is causing a disruption, and she tries to figure out if the controls in the spaceship are actually running and are functional. Okay, at that same moment back on Earth, there are Soviet leaders at the Pentagons, and they are holding a meeting, and also around the same time, sometime later, the Avengers were holding a meeting, and they were talking about what was going on with the National Security Council, and of course what was going on with the government at that time. So then of course Captain America and Vision get talking, and then a moment later Scarlet Witch comes up and tries to talk to Vision, and then suddenly a alarm goes off, and it's Captain Marvel. So then Vision then talks to Captain Marvel through the little tiny screen monitor, and so Captain Marvel then eventually talks to all of the team of the Avengers to figure out what the situation was. Okay, so Captain Marvel then is walking through a bunch of walking past actually a bunch of spaceships until suddenly somebody comes out and startles her, and then she starts attacking this enemy, and then a whole full-scale fight happens, and so then she's held captive on the ship. Okay, so later on, meanwhile, in the street in New York City, Janet Van Dyne, the original Wasp, takes a taxi cab, and then she meets up with the Avengers to try to help them out, to see what she can do to figure out what was going on with Captain Marvel, and to help the Avengers and aid in any help that she can. Okay, so the Avengers are now all together again, and Scarlet Witch and the Vision are leaving together. I can't remember exactly where the Scarlet Witch and Vision go off to, but then, okay, so then Captain America and the Wasp, they get talking a little bit, and then, okay, so then the scene switches back to Captain Marvel and the enemies that hold her prisoner on the spaceship. And that ends that story. The next story, The Avengers Into the Savage Land, number 256 June, is basically like what the story says. Okay, so of course in that whole story. There's not really much to say in that story, just that the Avengers find themselves in the Savage Land, and they have to help Kazar try to save his world from an enemy that's by the name of Terminus. And Terminus is a villain that destroys things. So then the next story that follows that same story that was before was the Avengers Terminus 257 July. Okay, so the Avengers are still helping Kazor fight Terminus in the Savage Land, and Terminus is wrecking up havoc on the Savage Land, and the Avengers are trying to take this enemy down, while meanwhile Captain Marvel is still stuck on the ship, and here appears Nebula. So then Nebula shows up and tries talking to the enemies that hold Captain Marvel, and then Nebula and the enemies try to interrogate Captain Marvel to find out where the location of the Avengers were. But of course, little did they know that the Avengers were actually still on planet Earth, and they were helping Kazor on the Savage Land. Okay, so the Avengers are still fighting Terminus, and eventually Terminus is finally stopped at the end of that story, and then the next story is the Fury of the Fire Lord. And I was kind of really surprised by this particular story, because I've never really knew who the Fire Lord was. And the Fire Lord happens to be a character that I guess played a important role in the next story that follows in that series. And I'm sorry, but I don't know that much about him, so I apologize. And then later in that story, Spider-Man shows up, and it's not your red Spider-Man, it's the Black Spider-Man, and Black Spider-Man was found by the Avengers, and Black Spider-Man was actually found to be in the Fire Lord in a battle before the Avengers had showed up to the scene. Okay, so then Fire Lord goes back to having his powers again, and meanwhile, then again, Nebula is still trying to question Captain Marvel and trying to get answers out of her, but of course, you know how Captain Marvel is. She refuses to answer to any of Nebula's questions, and then later the Skrulls get involved. So the Skrulls actually happen to be in the next Avengers story, the Avengers on the Side of the Skrulls, 259 September, and the Avengers and the Skrulls have to make an uneven alliance against Nebula. And at the end of that, they basically stop Nebula, but then again, I kind of don't remember what happens at the end. So it kind of is like a whole battle that happens after that, and then so I'm sorry if I'm stuttering, and I'm sorry if I'm hesitant about my information about this story. So I hope you learned something from just the things that I did remember, And if you get a chance, please subscribe to my channel. Thanks.